Hi, you're watching Reddit Confessions. She dropped it. That's the first thing I remember. The sound of the wine glass hitting the floor. Not the music, not the laughter around us. Just that crisp, awful shatter that made every head in the room turn for half a second. And then she looked up, right at me. Dana, my wife, dressed in that deep navy gown I'd never seen before. Hair swept up like she was royalty, standing beside a man with polished shoes and hands that lingered far too long on her hip. But let me back up. Just by one night. 12 hours earlier, I wasn't even supposed to know this event existed. She told me she'd be in Toledo for a 2-day budget summit. I believed her. I always did. That was my job, be the understanding husband. The guy who stayed out of the way, who picked up the dry cleaning and cooked frozen pizza with a smile. But the universe, for once, didn't want me in the dark. Because fate, or maybe just laziness, left her laptop open that morning. And there it was, glowing on the screen like a warning sign I'd ignored for too long. Pinnacle Partners Spring Gala. Confirmed RSVP. Dana Ellison, no guest. My hands shook. I didn't even know what Pinnacle Partners was. Turns out, it's her firm's biggest event of the year. Cocktail dresses, candlelit dinners, speeches from regional directors. And she hadn't said a word. No mention of it in the past month. Not even in passing. I stared at the screen for a full 5 minutes, jaw clenched. Then I did something I still can't believe. I copied the event details. Every line. Hotel name, room, dress code. I even jotted down the access code she'd used to confirm her reservation. And I showed up. Not out of anger. Not out of some plan for revenge. I just needed answers. I needed to see what my wife looked like when she thought I wasn't watching. And now here I was, hiding behind a tall floral arrangement in the back of a ballroom that smelled like lavender and ambition. Watching her laugh. Watching him whisper in her ear. Watching her smile in a way she hadn't smiled with me in over a year. And when that wine glass slipped from her fingers, when it crashed and drew attention from every corner of the room, that's when she saw me. The husband who wasn't supposed to exist tonight. What happened after that? Changed everything. The silence after the glass shattered was worse than the sound itself. It wasn't total silence, not really. Just that kind of awkward lull where clinking forks paused, where laughter died mid-breath, and where a string quartet faltered for a moment before continuing like nothing happened. But everything had changed, at least for me. Dana's eyes met mine, and in that moment, I thought something would crack on her perfectly made-up face. Shock, guilt, anger, anything. But there was nothing. She just blinked, then turned back to the man beside her like I was some stranger who had simply wandered into the wrong event. I stood there in a suit I didn't belong in, surrounded by people who wouldn't care if I evaporated on the spot, holding a drink I hadn't even tasted. My heart was pounding loud enough that I was sure someone could hear it. I didn't move. I couldn't. I just kept watching her. Watching them. The man leaned in again, said something into her ear. She smiled, forced this time, but still enough to make my stomach twist. Then he bent down and picked up the shattered stem of her wine glass from the floor like a gentleman. Like I hadn't been the one who'd spent the last 7 years cleaning up after her in every possible way. Then she walked away. No explanation. No confrontation. No sign that I was her husband standing across the room with betrayal written all over my face. She just glided across the ballroom, hand on that man's arm, disappearing toward a hallway behind the velvet-curtained stage. I was still frozen when someone brushed past me and muttered, "You okay, buddy?" I wasn't, but I nodded like I was. What kind of person forgets their husband is in the same room? Or worse, pretends he doesn't exist? I wasn't ready to believe what it looked like. I told myself maybe it wasn't romantic. Maybe it was a boss, a mentor, someone she had to impress. But deep down, I already knew. I'd known for months, I think. It just took this room, this lie, this night, to make me admit it. Still, I needed proof. Not for the world, just for myself. So I followed them. Not immediately. I gave it a minute, then made my way through the edge of the crowd, careful not to draw attention. Past the buffet table. Past a group of women laughing too loudly. Past the man checking his teeth in a silver tray. And then into the hallway where the chandeliers gave way to dim sconces and velvet red carpet. I didn't hear voices. Just the faint sound of heels clicking against marble and a distant laugh that definitely wasn't hers. Then I saw it. A door, just slightly ajar. Light spilling out. A gold plate that read private conference room, reserved. I stepped closer, barely breathing. Inside, through the narrow gap, I saw Dana sitting on a leather couch, knees turned toward that man. He handed her a new glass of wine. She took it, smiling, not the fake smile. The real one. The smile I hadn't seen in over a year. And then she reached out and touched his tie. Playful. Familiar. That's when I felt something inside me fold. Not break, not yet, but fold in on itself like an old chair that had finally given up. I left the hallway before I saw anything more. I didn't need to. Whatever I had been holding on to was gone now. Replaced by a hollow so loud, it drowned out the music as I walked back into the ballroom. She had brought someone else into the world she locked me out of, and I had just walked into it like an uninvited ghost. I wasn't sure what I was going to do next, but I knew one thing for sure. She saw me, and she chose to pretend she didn't. I didn't drive home that night. I sat in the parking lot across the street from the hotel, the engine off, just listening to the tick of the cooling metal under the hood. There was something sickening about how calm the city was. Horns in the distance, the flicker of a neon sign reflecting off the windshield, strangers walking by with their lives intact. And here I was, clutching a crumpled event pass and staring into nothing. I couldn't even cry. I just kept replaying it, her fingers on his tie, the way she smiled at him like I never existed. It was like watching someone else's wife. Someone else's life. I pulled out my phone more out of habit than thought. No texts from Dana. No missed calls. She hadn't even bothered to pretend she was still in Toledo. I checked her location. She'd turned it off. Of course. That used to be something she did only when she was flying. Lately, it had become a regular occurrence. Always an excuse. Battery saver mode, she'd say. It must have glitched, she'd shrug. I'd believed her. Like a fool. I was about to put the phone down when a message lit up on the screen. It was from her. But it wasn't to me. It was to him. And she'd sent it by accident. Somehow. Maybe by rushing. Maybe by nervous habit. She sent it to me. Tell them I'm with my husband if anyone asks. We'll meet in room 712 and 20. I froze. The words didn't even register right away. My name wasn't in there. But my role was. A lie. An alibi. She was using me to cover for him. I read the message again and again and again. Each time it cut deeper. She was still in that hotel. And she was about to disappear into a room with a man whose name I didn't know, but whose hands I couldn't unsee on her waist. I didn't respond. What could I even say? I just stared at the message until my thumb started to tremble. Then I turned the engine back on. I drove around the block once. Twice. I wasn't thinking straight. I didn't have a plan. I didn't even know what I wanted. An explanation? A confession? A breakdown? Maybe I just wanted her to see what she had done. To see me. The man she left in the shadows while she played a different life in plain sight. Room 712. I parked in the underground garage and took the service elevator. It was old, rattled every time it moved, and smelled like industrial cleaner and cheap perfume. My reflection in the metal doors looked like a man who hadn't slept in weeks, not hours. When the elevator opened on the 7th floor, the hallway was silent. Plush carpet, muted lights, too elegant for what was really happening behind those polished doors. I walked slowly. I told myself I was just going to look. Just to confirm. Just to know. Room 712. There it was. I stood there for a long moment. I pressed my ear against the door. I didn't hear anything at first, just the muffled sound of a television playing, then two voices. Low. Familiar. Hers. His. I couldn't make out the words, but I didn't need to. I could feel the betrayal bleeding through the door. My hand hovered over the doorknob. I wasn't going to knock. I wasn't going to yell. That wasn't me. But I needed her to know that I knew. I needed her to feel even a fraction of what I felt in that moment. So I did something I never thought I was capable of. I took a photo of the door. I zoomed in on the room number. Then I replied to her message, the one she thought was going to him. Looks like you're exactly where you said you weren't. I waited. 3 dots appeared, then vanished, then reappeared. And just like that, her carefully spun world began to unravel. The silence after I sent that text was worse than anything I'd ever felt. The hallway outside room 712 suddenly felt colder, like the walls were leaning in on me. I stood there, waiting for her to reply. Anything, even a lie, but nothing came. Just those dots. Typing. Stopping. Typing again. Like she was spinning a story in her head and couldn't find one that would work. I didn't knock. I didn't yell. I just waited. And after maybe 2 minutes that felt like 20, the doorknob turned. The door cracked open just enough to reveal her face. Hair slightly messy now, lipstick faded, eyes wide with panic. She didn't say my name. She didn't ask why I was there. She just stared at me like she was trying to calculate how much I knew. And then, in the softest, most rehearsed voice I'd ever heard her use, she said, "What are you doing here?" Not, "Oh my God." Not, "I can explain." Not even, "I'm sorry." Just that flat, dismissive question like I was the one out of place. "What am I doing here?" I repeated, my voice already shaking. "You told me you were in Toledo." She sighed. Sighed. Like I had just interrupted a sales call. "It's not what it looks like," she said, like she had that line stored in her back pocket for a moment just like this. I leaned against the doorframe and forced myself not to look past her, though I could see the edge of a blazer hanging off the chair inside. A man's voice murmured something unintelligible deeper in the room, and I watched her jaw tighten. "Are you going to let me in?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "No," she said instantly. "This isn't the time." "The time for what, Dana?" I asked, louder than I meant to. "To talk? To lie again? Or to finish whatever this is?" She stepped into the hallway, pulled the door halfway closed behind her, and crossed her arms like I had just embarrassed her at a dinner party. "Look, I didn't mean for you to find out this way." I almost laughed. So there was something to find out? She didn't answer, just looked at the floor. That moment broke me in a way that no scream or slap ever could. Because it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't explosive. It was quiet. Pathetic, even. Just a man asking his wife why he wasn't enough anymore while she stared at a patterned carpet like it might save her. "How long?" I asked, even though I hated myself for wanting to know. "A few months," she whispered. Not a denial. Not a gasp. Just the truth, served cold and quick like a shot of something that burns all the way down. "And you used me as your excuse?" I asked, pulling out my phone. "You told him to say you were with your husband if anyone asked. You dragged my name into this mess so you could sneak around like I was some dumb shadow you could control from a distance." "It was easier than explaining," she mumbled. "Easier than being honest." I snapped. She looked back at the door, then at me, and for the first time that night, her face cracked. Just a little. A flicker of shame. Or maybe fear. But it was gone just as fast. "I think you should leave," she said, her voice flat again. "No," I said. "You should. You should leave that room. That man. That fake version of yourself you only seem to enjoy when I'm not around. And when you do, you can come home and pick up the rest of your things." Lowell. "No," I cut her off. "Don't say my name like it still means something to you." And with that, I turned and walked away. Not fast. Not slamming doors. Just walked. Each step heavier than the last. I didn't turn around, but I heard the door close behind me. Not with a bang, but with the softest click I've ever heard. The walk back to my car felt like moving through fog. I don't even remember crossing the lobby or stepping into the elevator. Just the blur of lights and the buzzing in my ears like static. My hands were trembling when I finally sat behind the wheel, the driver's door still open, the stale air from the garage thick in my lungs. I should have driven off right then. I should have just gone home, locked the door behind me, and started packing her things like I told her I would. But something stopped me. Not anger. Not some desperate hope. It was this strange, gnawing instinct, like I was still missing something. Like she hadn't told me the full truth even after I caught her red-handed. So I stayed. I waited. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. And finally, I saw her. Dana stepped out of the elevator alone. Her posture was stiff, shoulders squared like she'd braced for a storm that never came. I watched as she walked across the lobby, not looking over her shoulder, not checking her phone, not a hint of regret on her face. She walked like a woman who had convinced herself that she was still in control of the story. I slumped low in my seat, heart pounding all over again. She didn't go toward the parking garage. She didn't call a ride. She walked to the curb, where a black car pulled up almost immediately. Not a cab, not an Uber. It was the same exact model I'd seen parked in front of our house once, about 3 months ago, when she claimed she was carpooling to a seminar. The driver stepped out and opened the door for her. It wasn't the man from the gala. It was someone else entirely. I didn't recognize him, but I knew what I was seeing. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This was a system, a routine, something she'd rehearsed and perfected. I stayed in the shadows as the car pulled away, taillights glowing like embers fading into the night. And in that moment, something snapped in me, not with fire, but with clarity. She hadn't just betrayed me. She had replaced me. It wasn't about that one man in room 712. It was about every time she told me I was paranoid. Every time she said I was too sensitive. Every birthday dinner she canceled. Every lie that sounded just a little too smooth. She didn't just fall out of love. She erased it quietly and filled the space with strangers who knew her better than I did. I drove home in silence. No music. No distractions. Just my thoughts unraveling everything I thought I knew about our life. When I stepped into the house, it felt foreign. Her jacket was still on the hook. Her perfume lingered in the hallway. Our dog, Penny, barked once from her bed in confusion, like she sensed something was wrong. I dropped my keys on the counter and stared at the fridge, our photos still magnetized there like we were happy. I pulled them down one by one. Her graduation picture. Our trip to Maine. That blurry shot of us eating funnel cake at the state fair. I stacked them in a drawer I didn't bother to close. Then I walked into our bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, and turned on her iPad. She never changed the password. And what I found in her messages confirmed what I already knew deep down. There wasn't just one man. There were 3 different names, 3 threads, 3 timelines of deception, woven together like a life she curated when I wasn't looking. There were hotels, dinners, inside jokes, and one message that read, "I'll tell him soon, just not yet." She hadn't planned to leave me. She planned to keep everything. Until I stopped being useful. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even try. I sat in the living room with every light off, staring at the hallway like I expected her to walk in and pretend nothing had happened. I rehearsed what I'd say if she did. Maybe I'd yell. Maybe I'd cry. Maybe I'd sit there in silence and just let her talk until the weight of her own lies crushed her. But she never came home. At 4:17 a.m., I heard a car pull into the driveway. I stayed still, watching from the window. It wasn't her usual car. It was a rental. She stepped out, heels in her hand, hair loose now, like she had tried to clean up the night but gave up halfway. She stood there for a moment, staring at the front door like it was a wall she couldn't break through. And then she turned around and drove away again. It should have broken me, but something inside me had shifted. I was no longer the man begging for explanations. I was the man who needed to know everything. So I kept digging. The next morning, after feeding Penny and forcing myself to eat a slice of toast I barely tasted, I went through the bedroom. Not angrily. Carefully. Methodically. I opened drawers I hadn't touched in years. Behind a stack of old scarves in her closet, in a shoebox labeled winter gloves, I found it. A second phone. It was cheap. Prepaid. Not connected to our plan. But fully charged. Unlocked. Like she never expected me to be the type to look. What I found wasn't just betrayal. It was strategy. There were dozens of messages, some recent, others months old. Conversations with different men. Some flirtatious. Some explicit. Some emotionally charged in ways I hadn't heard from her in years. One message stopped me cold. He still thinks I'm just tired from work. I honestly don't know how he doesn't suspect anything. She wasn't just unfaithful. She was mocking me. In real time. With strangers. One guy was saved as Evan Jim. She hasn't been to the gym in over a year. Another as Claire, which I realized quickly was a code name. They joked about me in that thread. About my boring dinners and Midwestern sadness. My chest tightened, but I didn't cry. I couldn't. I was past sadness now. I was in the strange space between numbness and clarity, where the pain is still there but suspended, floating just out of reach because your body doesn't know how to process it anymore. And then I made the mistake of checking the photo gallery. There were pictures of them. Together. Smiling in places I didn't recognize. Restaurant tables, hotel lobbies, even a selfie of her in our car, her hand resting on a thigh that wasn't mine. She looked happy. Not fake happy. Not forced. She looked free. I sat on the edge of the bed, phone in hand, and felt the kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from lack of sleep. It comes from realizing you've been lied to for so long that you don't even remember what the truth feels like. And then something darker occurred to me. This wasn't just about physical betrayal. It was psychological. She had created an entirely different life, a network of identities, locations, and relationships. I wasn't just cheated on. I had become the background character in my own home. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I backed up the entire phone. Every message. Every photo. Every timestamp. I wasn't sure why yet. Maybe I wanted to confront her with facts. Maybe I wanted to protect myself. Maybe I just wanted to prove to myself that it really happened, that this nightmare wasn't a product of my insecurities or imagination. And as I stared at that digital mountain of betrayal, one message caught my eye. It was from 3 days ago, from the same man at the gala. It read, "Does he know yet?" Her reply, "Not a clue. He's too soft. He'll never do anything." That's when I finally smiled. Not because it didn't hurt, but because she was wrong. She'd finally underestimated me. That one sentence, "He's too soft. He'll never do anything," kept echoing in my head like a challenge. She had me all figured out, didn't she? The loyal husband. The quiet one. The guy who avoided conflict, made peace, let things slide. I was the man she came home to when her other life got inconvenient. The one who folded laundry and paid bills while she texted lies from hotel bathrooms. I had become predictable to her. A background process she could count on to stay running while she lived her real life. But here's the thing. When you ignore something long enough, it doesn't disappear. It evolves. It changes shape. And my silence, the one she mistook for weakness, had become something else entirely. A record. I had the photos, the texts, the second phone. Everything she built on dishonesty was now in my hands. And she had no idea. That day, I made a decision. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg or confront her in some dramatic showdown. I was going to become just as quiet and calculating as she had been. If she thought I wouldn't do anything, then I'd show her what it looked like when I did everything, without a single word. The first thing I did was contact a lawyer. I didn't go to some massive firm. I found a small practice in the next town over, run by a woman named Renee who asked the right questions without judgment. I brought the phone, showed her the messages, explained how Dana had used my name as cover while carrying on multiple affairs. Renee looked at me for a long moment and said, "Let's make sure you don't walk away with nothing." For the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of control. Not revenge, clarity. Back at the house, Dana still hadn't come home. She'd sent a single text around noon. "Still in Toledo. Might stay one more night. Everything okay with Penny?" Penny was fine. But that wasn't the point. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I started gathering things. Not hers, mine. Documents. Financial records. Joint account statements. I dug through drawers and pulled out tax returns, insurance paperwork, the mortgage folder she hadn't touched in years. I scanned every page and backed them up to a private drive. The more I uncovered, the more I realized how much I'd let her take over the narrative of our lives. She handled the finances, the schedules, the explanations. I had just assumed my role and followed the script. But I wasn't following anymore. That evening, I made one final discovery. A locked file on her iPad. Encrypted, buried in the Notes app, titled Contingency. I used her usual password out of habit, our wedding date. It didn't work. Then I tried her birth year. No luck. I nearly gave up until I remembered a name she had once mentioned in her sleep months ago. Gavin. The one she'd laughed about in a dream. I typed it in, followed by 84, her high school graduation year. The file opened. Inside were outlines. A plan. Talking points. Divorce scenarios. Property division ideas. Even notes about how I might react emotionally and how she could keep things stable while separating assets. She had been planning to leave me for months, but only after she finished lining everything up. After she was safe. After she was sure I wouldn't blow it all up. That's why she smiled at the gala. That's why she never panicked when she saw me there. She thought she'd built her safety net well enough to land wherever she wanted, whenever she jumped. But she forgot something. Even a soft man can get tired of being stepped on. I closed the file. Saved a copy. Then I started writing something of my own. Dana came home 2 days later, as if nothing had happened. She walked through the door humming some forgettable tune, tossed her keys on the counter, and greeted Penny like she was returning from a casual business trip. No mention of the gala. No apology. Just a vague, tired smile and the smell of hotel shampoo lingering behind her. I watched from the kitchen, calm, unreadable. She didn't even seem curious why I hadn't responded to her texts. I asked how Toledo was. She said, "Long meetings. I'm exhausted." I nodded. "You should rest. We'll talk later." And she actually smiled, like she'd gotten away with it. Like her plan had worked. She had no idea that her contingency folder had already been printed, backed up, and sent to my attorney. No clue that the man she thought was too soft had spent the last 72 hours preparing the cleanest exit she never saw coming. That night, while she was in the shower, I left a small, sealed envelope on her nightstand. No yelling, no confrontation, just the truth, neatly written, with a list of the evidence I had, the lawyer's contact information, and a single line at the bottom. You made me invisible. I'm done living like I don't exist. I didn't sleep in the same bed. I stayed in the guest room. And when I woke up the next morning, she was gone. No note. No goodbye. Just an empty space where her suitcase used to be. A week later, the divorce was filed uncontested. I thought I'd feel broken, but I didn't. I felt clear, like I'd stepped out of someone else's story and started writing my own. I adopted new routines. I started cooking again, not frozen pizza, but real food. I deleted every shared account and got a new phone number. Penny and I walked longer paths, through parts of town we hadn't seen in years. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small. I felt seen, because I had finally stopped waiting for someone else to value me. And that, after everything, was the real ending I never saw coming. Thank you for watching Reddit Confessions. If you were in Lowell's shoes, at what moment would you have drawn the line? Was it the hotel hallway? The second phone? Or that cold line in the messages? He's too soft. Tell us in the comments which moment hit you the hardest. And remember, sometimes the quietest people carry the loudest truths.